The price of a slap at the airport was a downfall that would last a lifetime. My husband thought he was the king of the world when he struck my cheek to protect his mistress. He forgot that the plane tickets, the hotel, and every credit card in his wallet were in my name. The instant his hand hit my face, I decided that in the next instant, I would turn him into a beggar on the street. This is my story, a one-way ticket to hell for them. That morning, the atmosphere in Terminal 4 of John F. Kennedy International Airport was unusually cold. It was a stark contrast to Catherine's heart, which burned with an incandescent rage. She adjusted the thick, cream-colored coat that enveloped her. With her right hand, she pushed a cart carrying 2 large suitcases. Today was the day she had been waiting for the last 2 years. The winter vacation in Whistler, Canada, wasn't just a trip for her. It was a gift to herself after working relentlessly to build the catering and real estate business she inherited from her family. Catherine managed a faint smile behind her mask, imagining the snowflakes that would greet her in Whistler. She had prepared everything to perfection, from the business-class plane tickets to the lodging in a luxurious cabin and the list of gourmet restaurants to visit. But as she approached the meeting point near Gate B-22, the smile slowly vanished from her face. Her heart began to pound, not with anticipation, but with a sudden, overwhelming dread. There stood her husband, Michael, wearing the black leather jacket she had bought him just last week. Michael was not alone. Beside him, his mother sported a gaudy faux fur shawl around her neck. But it wasn't the presence of her mother-in-law that made Catherine's blood boil. It was the figure of the young woman standing with them. It was Jessica. Catherine only knew her as a former co-worker of Michael's, whom he often referred to as just a friend. Jessica, in a tight pink sweater, was clinging to Michael's arm, letting out a flirtatious laugh. Catherine stopped the cart a few feet away from them, took a deep breath to calm the turmoil in her chest, and approached. The sound of the cart's wheels made the 3 of them turn their heads. A flicker of surprise crossed Michael's face. However, he quickly replaced it with a placid and serene expression, as if nothing were out of place. His mother, on the other hand, shot her a sharp, inquisitive glare, scanning her from head to toe. Jessica, for her part, let go of Michael's arm and put on a face of feigned innocence. With a voice she struggled to keep calm, Catherine asked what was going on. Why were they all there with large suitcases? Michael, with a light tone that belittled Catherine, replied that he had decided to take his mother and Jessica on vacation. According to him, it wasn't fair for him to have fun alone while his mother and her friend were left at home. Catherine's mouth fell open, incredulous at the reason she was hearing. She reminded Michael that this trip was planned as quality time for the 2 of them, to repair their marriage, which had grown distant lately. The mother-in-law interjected with her characteristic shrill voice. She accused Catherine of being a cheap and ungrateful wife. According to the mother-in-law, Catherine had plenty of money but was calculating with her in-laws. She said Jessica was a sweet and polite girl, unlike the rigid Catherine, and was worth bringing along to liven things up. Jessica bowed her head shyly like a cat, but her eyes shot a mocking glance at Catherine. Catherine felt her face burn. She stressed that she had paid for all the tickets and accommodation with her hard-earned money, not Michael's. She refused to pay for Jessica's travel expenses. For Catherine, bringing a stranger on their couple's vacation was an insult. Michael started to get agitated. His face reddened as he felt his authority as a husband being challenged in front of his mother and girlfriend. He yelled at Catherine that a wife's duty is to obey and serve her husband, and that included treating her husband's guests with respect. Their argument began to attract the attention of passers-by in the airport. Feeling her pride trampled, Catherine said firmly that if Michael wanted to bring Jessica, he had to pay for her expenses, not her. Catherine also demanded that Jessica leave immediately, as she didn't want another woman's presence to ruin her vacation. Hearing that, Jessica began to sob quietly. Her crocodile tears further enraged the mother-in-law, who cursed Catherine, calling her a wicked and heartless woman. Unable to bear Jessica's tears and his mother's anger, Michael strode toward Catherine without warning. His sturdy hand rose and struck Catherine's left cheek. Smack. The sound echoed loud enough to stop the movement of people around. A sharp pain instantly seized her cheek, followed by a heat that spread to her ear. Catherine staggered backward, brought a hand to her throbbing cheek, and looked at Michael with disbelieving eyes. In 5 years of marriage, It was the first time Michael had ever laid a hand on her. Before Catherine could process the pain, Michael slapped her a second time, harder this time, splitting the corner of her lip. Michael yelled in her face. He said the slaps were a lesson to teach her not to be a rebellious and arrogant wife with her fortune. The mother-in-law, far from stopping him, encouraged him, saying that Catherine deserved it to learn her place. Behind Michael, Jessica flashed a faint smile of victory at seeing her rival humiliated in public. Fresh blood welled from the corner of Catherine's lips, staining her expensive cream-colored coat. Catherine tasted the salty tang of blood on her tongue. The physical pain was nothing compared to that of her heart, which shattered in that moment. In that instant, any remaining love and respect she had for Michael vanished without a trace. Catherine didn't cry hysterically, nor did she fight back. She simply wiped the blood from her chin with the back of her hand, straightened up, and looked her husband in the eye. Her gaze turned cold, empty, and sharp. With a low but very clear voice, as if she now understood everything, she said she wouldn't argue anymore. Michael smirked cynically, thinking Catherine had finally bent and obeyed. He ordered her to check in for all of them immediately, but Catherine slowly shook her head. She said she would leave Michael, his mother, and Jessica to their fate. With biting sarcasm, she wished them a happy vacation. Then she turned and walked away with quick but firm steps, leaving the luggage cart where it stood. Michael shouted Catherine's name, threatening to divorce her if she didn't come back. The threat echoed through the terminal's halls, but Catherine didn't look back for a second. Her steps carried her more firmly away from the toxins in her life. In her mind, there were no longer plans for a romantic vacation. Instead, a new, much colder and more calculating plan had emerged. As she walked, Catherine took out her cell phone. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, accessing her banking and airline apps. The slaps had just awakened the lioness sleeping inside Catherine. She wouldn't just leave. She vowed she would make them pay dearly for every drop of blood that had spilled from her lips that day. Michael watched Catherine's back grow smaller until it disappeared into the crowd. He snorted with disdain and adjusted his jacket collar with an arrogant gesture. At his side, his mother patted his shoulder, both calming and justifying Michael's violent behavior. According to his mother, a woman like Catherine needed to be taught a physical lesson from time to time so the money wouldn't go to her head. Jessica, whose tears had dried in an instant, clung coquettishly to Michael's arm again. In a falsely concerned tone, she asked if they could really go to Canada. Michael laughed contemptuously. With complete confidence, he assured Jessica and his mother that Catherine was just throwing a childish tantrum. Michael was 100% sure that Catherine loved him too much to dare cancel anything. He thought Catherine just needed some time in the restroom to cool down and would surely catch up with them later or call him crying to apologize. Michael took charge of the luggage cart Catherine had abandoned, feeling victorious at the thought that he now controlled even his wife's possessions. The three of them, chins held high, headed to the first-class check-in counter for the international airline. Michael felt like a king, leading his entourage. He imagined the plush airplane seats, the sumptuous food, and the premium service he would soon enjoy. His mother was busy preening herself in the reflection of the airport windows, and Jessica was taking selfies to post on social media with a caption hinting at a luxurious vacation with her lover. The priority check-in line was empty. A woman in an impeccable uniform greeted them with a professional and friendly smile, asking for their passports and reservation number. Michael, as if he were a tycoon, placed his passport, his mother's and Jessica's on the counter, along with a piece of paper with the reservation number he had secretly photographed from Catherine's phone the night before. In an imperative tone, he said to hurry up, as his mother was tired of standing. The agent nodded politely and began typing the code into the computer system. There was a moment of silence. The agent's fingers stopped dancing on the keyboard. She frowned. She re-entered the code, this time more slowly, ensuring she hadn't made a mistake with any number or letter. Michael began to drum his fingers on the counter, impatient. Meanwhile, Jessica started complaining that her feet hurt in her high heels. The agent looked up. Her friendly smile had been replaced by an expression of slight confusion and regret. She informed Michael that the reservation number could not be found in the system for today's flights. Michael's eyes widened. He insisted it was impossible, that Catherine had made the reservation last month and that he had seen the confirmation himself. He told the agent to check again, accusing the computer system of having problems. The agent patiently explained that the reservation data existed, but the status of the tickets for all passengers included in that reservation number had been unilaterally canceled by the primary account holder about 10 minutes ago. Michael's face, which had been red with anger, turned pale in an instant. The cancellation had occurred just after Catherine left them. The shock of reality began to hit Michael's consciousness. Catherine wasn't just threatening, she had truly clipped his wings. Upon hearing the agent's explanation, the mother-in-law burst into a fit of rage. She screamed hysterically in front of the counter, cursing the airline and shouting Catherine's name, along with crude insults. The mother-in-law's shrill voice made other passengers in the economy class line turn and whisper. Jessica began to panic. She shook Michael's arm, asking him what would happen to their vacation. Embarrassment began to spread across Michael's face. He tried to calm his mother, who had started acting like a child denied a toy. Michael quickly took out his phone and dialed Catherine's number. It rang once and then disconnected. He called again, and an operator informed him that the number was unavailable or out of the coverage area. Catherine had turned off her phone or blocked Michael's number. A cold sweat trickled down Michael's temples. He was trapped in a very embarrassing situation. He couldn't just go home, as he had bragged to his neighbors and coworkers about going abroad. His pride was too great to go back home dragging the suitcases. Michael pulled out his wallet with trembling hands. He took out the platinum credit card he had been so proud of. It was actually a supplementary card issued from Catherine's primary account, but Michael had always considered it his own. He told the agent he would buy 3 new tickets on the spot. The price was much higher for the last-minute purchase, but Michael didn't care. He was sure the card's limit was still very high. The agent swiped the card through the terminal. The machine emitted a long beep and a small receipt. The agent read it and, in a polite but firm tone, said the transaction had been declined by the issuing bank. Michael couldn't believe it. He told the agent to try again. The result was the same. Declined. Michael took out a second card, a debit card linked to a joint account that was 90% funded by Catherine's money. The result was the same. Transaction failed. Insufficient funds or card blocked. A series of text message notifications arrived on Michael's phone. They were from the bank, informing him that at the request of the primary account holder, his access to the credit and debit cards had been deactivated for security reasons. In a matter of minutes, Catherine had completely paralyzed them financially. In the middle of that grand airport, Michael felt small. He stood rigidly with his wallet open, which now only contained a couple of useless plastic cards and a few dollar bills, not enough to buy even a domestic plane ticket, let alone one to Canada. The mother-in-law made things worse. She began to wail, accusing the airport staff of conspiring with her daughter-in-law to mistreat an old woman. Airport security officers began to approach as the scene she was making disturbed the peace. Jessica abruptly let go of Michael's hand. Her sweet face had soured. She demanded Michael do something and not embarrass her like this. Jessica had to get on a plane today, no matter what. Michael tried to open his mobile banking app to check his personal balance, which he had been slowly saving from the allowance Catherine gave him. The number that appeared on the screen left him helpless. The balance was $0. Apparently, Catherine, using a power of attorney Michael had signed in the past without reading the contents, had reclaimed all the funds she had transferred to his personal account. The 3 of them now stood helplessly by the check-in counter. The large suitcases, which once seemed imposing, now looked like a heavy burden mocking their impotence. People in line began to look at them with disdain and disgust, especially after hearing the mother-in-law's rude screams. Michael felt his world collapsing. He had no tickets, no money, and no way to contact Catherine. The vacation of his dreams had turned into a nightmare before the plane even took off. In the distance, Michael thought he saw the ghost of Catherine smiling coldly, enjoying the ruin that had just begun. Catherine quietly entered the VIP lounge, an area restricted to ordinary passengers. The atmosphere inside was like a different world, miles away from the chaos she had just left behind. The air was scented with a subtle lavender aroma, and the air conditioning was set to a perfect temperature. It was nothing like the stuffy air, thick with sweat and emotions, of the departures hall. The receptionist at the entrance greeted her warmly. As Catherine was a top-tier priority member cardholder, they didn't waste time verifying her identity and respectfully addressed her by name. Catherine nodded silently with a faint smile, as the corner of her lip, split by Michael's slap, was sore. She chose a single sofa with a direct view of the tarmac, where enormous planes were preparing to carry people's dreams to different parts of the world. After sitting down and resting her stiff back, an attendant brought her a refreshing, non-alcoholic orange-colored cocktail and a warm towel. Catherine took the towel and gently applied it to her still throbbing cheek. The warm sensation slightly eased the physical pain, but her mind became even clearer to plot her next moves. She took a tablet out of her handbag. Her fingers moved nimbly, revoking all financial access linked to Michael. One by one, block notifications appeared on the screen. The supplementary credit card, the debit card, and the mobile banking access she had provided based on marital trust were now completely locked. No more cash flow for the parasite. After securing her finances, Catherine opened another airline's app. She booked a first-class ticket to Whistler departing in 2 hours. This ticket was in one name only: Catherine. No Michael, no mother-in-law, no Jessica. While Catherine savored the serenity on the luxurious sofa, watching the planes take off, a contrasting scene was unfolding in the public area of the airport. Michael, his mother, and Jessica were now stranded near a large pillar outside the check-in area. They looked like disaster victims, lost in the middle of the lavish airport. The large suitcases they had brought had become a painful burden. The mother-in-law was sitting on one of them, her face flushed, fanning herself briskly with her hand, as if trying to ward off the humiliation that was starting to envelop them. Jessica stood restlessly, biting her nails, constantly looking around, afraid that someone might recognize them after the earlier scandal. Hunger began to set in, as they hadn't eaten anything since morning, expecting the delicious food in the VIP lounge Michael had promised. But that hope had vanished. Michael paced back and forth with his phone glued to his ear. His face was tense, and cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He was desperately looking for someone to lend him money. He called his friend Carlos, whom he often treated to drinks with Catherine's money. But when Michael expressed his intention to borrow $8,000 to buy tickets, Carlos hung up with the excuse that he was in the middle of a home renovation. Michael called his co-worker, Fernando. Fernando, in turn, laughed and joked about why the husband of a wealthy woman like Catherine needed to borrow pocket change. He went through all the contacts on his phone, but one by one, they rejected him. Michael realized how insignificant he was in the eyes of others, without the tag of his wife's wealth. His friends had approached him not out of loyalty to him, but for Catherine's money. Desperate, Michael returned to his mother and his mistress. He shook his head helplessly, indicating he hadn't secured any money. The mother-in-law erupted in anger again. She beat Michael's arm with her purse, accusing him of being a useless husband who couldn't control his own wife. The mother-in-law lamented her fate, imagining the shame she would have to endure, explaining to her neighbors why she had returned after bragging about going abroad. Jessica, who had been quiet until now, began to complain. She whined that she was thirsty, hungry, and her legs ached from standing so long. She demanded Michael buy her a drink from the airport cafe. Michael reached into his pants pocket and pulled out his now thin leather wallet. He only had about $120 in cash left. If he bought 3 bottles of water and a few sandwiches at the airport, the remaining money would vanish in a flash. In the VIP lounge, Catherine opened her social media. She posted a simple but meaningful photo, her passport and her new boarding pass on a marble table with the cocktail glass and a view of the planes in the background. She wrote a short caption, "Flying solo. Baggage-free is so much lighter. Goodbye, NYC. Hello, Whistler." The post received hundreds of reactions in minutes. Catherine's friends, business partners, and even old acquaintances left supportive comments. It was as if they had been waiting a long time for the moment Catherine would break free from Michael. Catherine felt a sense of relief reading the comments. For all this time, she had turned a deaf ear to her friends' warnings about Michael's true nature, and now their support strengthened her resolve. But it wasn't just Catherine's post that went viral. Unbeknownst to Michael and his group, who were busy arguing in a corner of the airport, an amateur video began to go viral on TikTok and Twitter. The video had been filmed by a passenger who happened to be nearby when Michael slapped Catherine. The video's title was highly provocative: "Crazed Husband Assaults Millionaire Wife at JFK to Defend His Mistress." The 2-minute video clearly showed Michael's fierce face as he slapped Catherine, the mother-in-law's scowling face hurling insults, and Jessica's fake innocence hiding behind Michael. The video unequivocally demonstrated how dignified Catherine's response was and how cruel the treatment she received was. The social media algorithm worked quickly. The video began to be shared thousands of times, sparking outrage among netizens, known for being combative when defending victims of infidelity and violence. Michael, still arguing with his mother-in-law about whether to take a cab or a bus, was unaware that his face was now on millions of phone screens. He still considered himself a victim of a disobedient wife. Mustering his remaining pride, Michael decided to take his group home. But a new problem arose. The airport taxis didn't accept delayed payments, and his ride-sharing app was linked to the credit card Catherine had already blocked. They had to find a way back to their luxurious home in Greenwich, Connecticut, without being sure if they still had the keys. Michael looked at the airport exit with a lost gaze. The dream of seeing the Canadian snow had turned into the reality of the New York heat and grime, ready to swallow them whole. The path out of the airport was like walking on hot coals for Michael. The three of them trudged towards the regular taxi stand, dragging their large suitcases. There was no more laughter or arrogance, only tired faces and bitter hearts. When they reached the front of the taxi line, the driver refused to take them without the guarantee of a cash payment. The distance to Greenwich was considerable, and the tolls weren't cheap. Reluctantly, Michael took off the chronograph watch from his wrist. It was a high-end replica he had bought to show off. He offered it to an unlicensed driver, soliciting fares in a corner. After a humiliating haggle, the watch sold for a mere $400. It was enough for the cab and tolls, but with nothing left over, they finally climbed into an old sedan whose air conditioning barely worked. Michael sat in the front seat next to the driver, while his mother and Jessica squeezed into the back. The atmosphere in the car was suffocatingly silent, broken only by the noisy engine. Jessica, bored and seeking validation, pulled out her phone to check social media. She expected to find some sympathy, or at least see photos of other people's vacations. But as soon as she opened Instagram, her eyes widened. Her account notifications had exploded into the thousands. Her follower count had skyrocketed, but not for her achievements. The comment section of her last photo, one from the airport with the caption, "Vacay with my love," was filled with insults. Harsh words like homewrecker, cheap woman, shameless mistress, gold digger flooded the screen. Jessica trembled as she opened her direct messages. The content was even more horrific. Threats, curses, and even screenshots of the airport incident video were sent to her. Netizens, with a skill worthy of cyber detectives, had quickly located her social media accounts. Jessica's identity was completely exposed. Her workplace, her old apartment address, and even unflattering photos from her past began to circulate. Jessica screamed hysterically in the cab, making the driver nearly swerve in shock. She threw the phone into the mother-in-law's lap. The bewildered old woman picked it up and read the comments. Her aged face turned pale. Not only Jessica, but the Facebook account the mother-in-law used to show off to her bridge club friends was also under attack. On old photos of the mother-in-law with Catherine, netizens commented, "Devil mother-in-law and old witch." The mother-in-law's reputation in her neighborhood had collapsed in an instant. The veil of the wise matriarch she had built was torn, exposing her flaws to the public. Michael immediately opened his own phone. His situation was much worse. His identity as an abusive husband had already spread across several high-reach gossip accounts. The video of the slap had been replayed millions of times in slow motion, showing just how cruel he had been. Netizens even tagged the social media account of the company where Michael worked, demanding the dismissal of an employee who committed violence against women. Michael felt the world spinning. He tried to delete his account, but his hands were shaking too much. It was too late. Digital footprints are not so easily erased. Across the world, Or more accurately, in the sky on a connecting flight, Catherine activated the first-class Wi-Fi service. She watched the commotion unfolding back home with a smile of cold satisfaction. She didn't need to hire an army of trolls or spend money to attack Michael. Karma and Michael's own stupidity had mobilized the masses. Catherine decided to do a short Instagram live stream. She adjusted her scarf and, without filters so the bruise on the corner of her lips was clearly visible, she greeted her followers. "Hello, everyone," she said in a soft but firm voice. "Thank you for your prayers and support. I'm okay. I'm going to a place where I can find peace again. This wound on my face," Catherine continued, gently touching her cheek, "will heal, but the wound of betrayal will probably take longer. I just want to tell you to never be afraid to leave a place that hurts you, even if it means flying solo." The live stream was watched by tens of thousands simultaneously. Public sympathy poured out for Catherine. In the comments section, many lawyers offered free legal assistance, many women shared similar stories, and the moral support was overwhelming. Catherine ended the stream gracefully, without once insulting Michael, which ironically made his image even worse, painting him as a man who had hurt a woman as good as Catherine. Back on the highway outside New York City, in the hot cab, Michael's phone rang. The name Mr. Davies appeared on the screen. Michael's heart skipped a beat. Mr. Davies was his direct boss and a close friend of Catherine's late father. With sweaty hands, Michael answered the call. Mr. Davies's voice on the other end was cold, firm, and unforgiving. "Michael," the boss's voice boomed even through the phone. "I just saw the video that's circulating. What a disappointment. Our company does not tolerate acts of violence, especially against one's own wife. Keeping someone like you on could damage the company's image." "Mr. Davies, this is a misunderstanding. Can I explain?" Michael tried to interrupt. "There's nothing to explain," Mr. Davies cut him off. "The video evidence is clear. As of this moment, you are fired in disgrace. The official termination letter has been sent to your email, and a copy to your home address. Don't bother setting foot in the company again. I've already instructed the security team to bar you from entry. And one more thing, return all company assets by courier before tomorrow, or I will report you for embezzlement." The call was unilaterally disconnected. Michael dropped the phone to the car floor. He sat stunned, his gaze fixed on the traffic ahead. Fired. He had just lost his only source of personal income at a time when he didn't have a single dollar. He was in debt and hated by the entire country. In the back seat, his mother was still crying over her reputation, and Jessica was busy deleting her photos while cursing the netizens. The three of them were in a metal box, speeding towards total ruin. Meanwhile, the wife they had hurt was flying high above the clouds, leaving them to rot in the consequences of their own actions. The old cab pulled up in front of a tall black gate that separated the public road from the expansive grounds of a luxurious Mediterranean-style villa. A fine drizzle was beginning to fall, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. It was as if nature itself was either crying or laughing at the fate of the three disheveled humans who had just stepped out of the car. Michael paid the driver with the last of his money, dismissing him without a single cent for a tip. As the taxi's wheels pulled away, a suffocating silence enveloped them. Before them stood the castle they had always been proud of, the place where Michael felt like a king and his mother the Queen Dowager. But something was different today. The garden lights, which normally switched on automatically on a cloudy day, were off, and the house appeared completely dark, in contrast to the brightly lit homes of the neighbors. Michael approached the digital lock panel embedded in the gate pillar. With a movement that had become muscle memory, his fingers keyed in his date of birth, the password that for years had been the key to his earthly paradise. A long, low-pitched beep sounded, followed by a rapid blinking of a red light. ACCESS denied. Michael frowned. He thought he had mistyped it out of nervousness. He tried again, this time more slowly, pressing each number firmly. The result was the same. The red light flashed again, mocking his efforts. Michael began to panic. He tried the backup password, his mother's birthday, then their wedding anniversary. All failed. The iron gate did not budge, solid, protecting what was inside from its now disgraced master. The mother-in-law, impatient, began to scold Michael to stop playing around and open the gate as the drizzle was turning into a heavier rain. Jessica, her makeup starting to run, stood with her arms crossed, shivering. Her eyes fixed on a pile of cardboard boxes stacked carelessly outside the fence, next to the security guard's booth. The pile was precariously covered with a blue tarp to protect it from the damp, but the edges were splattered with mud. A bad feeling crept into Jessica's mind. She tapped Michael's arm and pointed to the pile with her chin. Before Michael could inspect the boxes, the small door of the security booth opened. Out stepped Mr. Rojas, the security guard who had worked at the house since Catherine's late father's time. Normally, Mr. Rojas would greet Michael with respect, bowing and opening the gate. But this time, Mr. Rojas stood tall in his impeccable uniform. His face was flat, without a smile, and his gaze was sharp. In his hands, he held a clipboard with documents. Mr. Rojas did not open the gate. Instead, he stood in the way to block access to the panel, positioning himself like a wall between Michael and the house. Michael yelled at Mr. Rojas, ordering him to open the gate immediately and asking who had dared to change the code to his own house. Mr. Rojas replied calmly that he was only following the orders of the legal owner of the house. Michael became even more enraged. He shouted that he was the owner's husband, therefore he was also the owner. Mr. Rojas slowly shook his head and handed him a copy of the documents on the clipboard. They were a copy of the property deed for the house and land, entirely in Catherine's name, and a newly issued legal declaration from that day ordering the eviction of occupants with no ownership stake. Michael snatched the papers. His eyes widened as he read the lines of legal jargon that invalidated his rights. It was specified that Michael had no claim to the property whatsoever, thanks to a prenuptial agreement he had hastily signed in the past, blinded by Catherine's love and wealth. The rain was now falling harder, soaking the paper in Michael's hands and making the ink run as if trying to erase Michael's existence from the house's history. The mother-in-law, who had peeked at the letter's contents, felt her legs give way. She collapsed onto the wet, dirty asphalt. Mr. Rojas pointed to the pile of boxes outside the fence. He explained that Mrs. Catherine had ordered the household staff to pack all of Michael's and his mother's personal belongings. Clothes, shoes, even the smallest trinket. Everything had been taken out, leaving nothing behind. On the other hand, the valuables, paintings, luxury furniture, and expensive electronics being Catherine's property remained inside. Mr. Rojas emphasized that they were strictly forbidden to set foot beyond the gate. If they tried to force their way in, Mr. Rojas had instructions to press an emergency button connected directly to the nearest police station for trespassing. The mother-in-law screamed hysterically, crawling to the pile of boxes and began to tear it apart wildly, searching for a collection of antique ceramics she claimed as her own, though they had actually been bought with Catherine's money. She discovered one of the ceramic pieces had broken inside the box due to careless packing. The mother-in-law's wail erupted in the rain. She lamented her fate, thrown out like a stray cat, hugging the ceramic fragments as if they were the corpse of her child. Seeing the chaos, Jessica began to lose her patience. She didn't care about ceramics or property deeds. What she cared about was that she was soaked, cold, and hungry. Jessica started cursing Michael. Her flirtatious voice transformed into a harsh scream. She called him a useless man, a fraud, and a pauper. Jessica yelled that she regretted joining the vacation if it was going to end with her being homeless. She kicked a puddle, splashing mud on Michael's pants. Jessica said she would just go back to her own apartment. She didn't want to share the suffering. She turned to look for another cab, though she didn't know how she would pay for it. Seeing Jessica about to leave, Michael, who was at his emotional lowest, felt abandoned. He ran after Jessica and grabbed her roughly by the wrist. Michael shouted in the rain, his eyes filled with anger and despair. He reminded Jessica that she was one of the causes of this ruin. He said he wouldn't let her escape just like that after she had enjoyed his money. He said if they were thrown out together, she had to suffer with him too. Michael's grip was so tight that Jessica winced in pain. Their fight became a free spectacle for Mr. Rojas, who stood firm behind the gate. Curious neighbors began to peer from behind their window curtains. Michael, his mother, and Jessica were now social outcasts, stranded on the street, without a roof, money, or dignity. They eventually dragged their wet boxes and found shelter under the awning of an empty storefront not far from the residential complex, waiting for a miracle that would not come amidst the intensifying storm. The night grew deeper, and the cold air chilled them to the bone. After walking a considerable distance, dragging the suitcases and the few boxes they could still salvage, Michael finally found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. The building looked gloomy, with peeling paint on the walls and a neon sign that read "Vacancy" flickering weakly as if it didn't want to welcome guests. With the little money they managed to scrape together from the mother-in-law's pockets and Jessica's reluctantly produced wallet, they could barely afford one cramped room for the night. It was the lowest category room, damp, with a stale smell of tobacco, and only one double bed with yellowish sheets. As soon as the door opened, a musty smell hit their noses. Jessica immediately covered her nose with an undisguised expression of disgust. She refused to sit on the edge of the bed, fearing mites or germs would cling to her designer clothes. The mother-in-law, extremely tired, no longer cared. She flopped onto the bed, taking up nearly 3/4 of it. Seeing this, Jessica immediately protested. She yelled that she didn't want to sleep on the cold, dirty floor. She demanded the mother-in-law make room. The mother-in-law, in a very bad mood, didn't back down. She yelled at Jessica to respect her elders. She threw it in her face that it was because of her that Catherine had gotten angry and thrown them out. If Jessica hadn't come along, the mother-in-law would probably still be sleeping in her plush, king-sized bed in the Greenwich house. Hearing the accusation, Jessica exploded. The mask of the sweet, submissive woman she had worn in front of the mother-in-law shattered. Jessica retorted with harsh words, calling the mother-in-law a greedy old woman who only wanted to live comfortably at others' expense. Jessica said the mother-in-law had also enjoyed the money Michael gave her, so she shouldn't hypocritically blame her. A shameful fight over sleeping space broke out. Jessica pulled the blanket covering the mother-in-law, and the mother-in-law grabbed Jessica's wet hair. They rolled on the musty bed, scratching and cursing each other like alley cats fighting over scraps. Michael could only sit on a creaky wooden chair in a corner of the room, holding his head, which felt like it was about to burst. He watched the two women he had defended tooth and nail at the airport, now hurting each other in a cheap motel. The scene hit him hard. Was this the happiness for which he had sacrificed his loyal wife? Amidst the uproar, Michael's gaze fell on an old rotary phone on the wall near the dresser with the broken mirror. A crazy idea crossed his mind. Maybe, just maybe, Catherine still had some compassion left. Maybe her heart would soften upon hearing Michael's pleading voice. Michael approached the phone. He realized he couldn't make an international call directly from the motel phone without a deposit, but he remembered he had an international calling card he had bought for work, the code for which he kept in his wallet. With trembling hands, he dialed the access code and then Catherine's personal cell number, which he knew by heart. The phone rang. Michael's heart pounded. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Michael was about to hang up in despair, but suddenly he heard a voice. "Hello?" Catherine's voice was clear, calm, and in the background, he could hear the crackling of firewood, the sound of a fireplace. A lump formed in Michael's throat. He could picture Catherine sitting on a leather sofa in a warm wooden cabin in the Whistler Mountains, perhaps with a cup of hot chocolate in her hand. Outside, the snow would be falling beautifully, such a stark contrast to Michael, in a smelly room with the screams of his mother and Mistress in the background. "Catherine, it's me!" Michael's voice was hoarse and sounded pathetic. "Honey, please. I'm sorry. We have nowhere to live. My mother is sick. Jessica. She regrets it too. Please, help us. Open the house door, or at least send us some money so we can eat. I'll fix everything. I promise. I'll leave Jessica if you want." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then came a small, light laugh. It wasn't a mocking, harsh laugh, but the light laugh of someone who has truly shed a great burden. "I'm sorry. Who is this?" Catherine asked in a deliberately neutral tone. "My husband died this morning at the airport, along with my interest in him, and the people you mention, I don't know them. I have no obligation to feed strangers, especially ill-mannered paupers." Michael tried to plead again. Tears began to well in his eyes. "Catherine, don't be so cruel. I'm your husband." "Ex-husband," Catherine corrected him sharply. "Enjoy your night in the hell you've created, Mr. Michael." Oh, and this cabin is really warm as my happy feelings watching you fall apart. Click. The call was cut. The monotonous dial tone sounded like the death sentence for Michael's last hope. He slowly hung up the receiver. His body slid to the cold floor. Meanwhile, on the bed, the fight between the mother-in-law and Jessica had ceased due to exhaustion. The mother-in-law had finally fallen asleep in a fetal position, clutching her purse and snoring loudly from physical and mental exhaustion. Jessica sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes red and swollen, a look of hatred fixed on Michael's back. She had overheard the phone call. She had heard Michael was willing to leave her for Catherine's money. Jessica's heart froze. She realized there was no love here, only self-interest. And now this ship had sunk. She had to save herself. Jessica's eyes fell on the mother-in-law's ring finger, which hung loosely by the pillow. There shone an old gold ring with a red ruby. It was the only genuine piece of jewelry the mother-in-law owned, an heirloom from her late husband that she never took off, not even to bathe. Jessica swallowed. Her cunning mind worked quickly. That ring could surely be sold for a few $1,000s. Enough money for a ticket back to her hometown, or at least to get a new apartment and survive for a week. Jessica glanced at Michael, who was still on the floor, stunned, lamenting his fate. Slowly and very carefully, Jessica approached the mother-in-law. Her slender fingers moved slowly, like a snake, and touched the old woman's wrinkled fingers. The mother-in-law stirred slightly, and Jessica held her breath, but the snoring resumed. Jessica continued her action. She slightly moistened the mother-in-law's finger with a bit of saliva to make it slip, and then slowly pulled the ring. 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters. The ring came off. Jessica clenched it tightly in her fist. Her heart was pounding. She tucked the ring deep into her pants pocket. Jessica sat up straight again. She pretended to massage her legs while planning her escape at dawn, when Michael and his mother were still asleep. She would not sink with this pair of idiots. She was an expert survivor, and tonight she would escape as far as possible with the only remaining possession of that shattered family. Dawn broke reluctantly on the eastern horizon, filtering a gloomy gray light through the cracks of the motel's dirty, dusty curtains. Inside the cramped, smelly room, the morning silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint snores of the mother-in-law, who was still asleep, perhaps dreaming of a past where she was still a respected matriarch. Michael sat on the floor, his back against the cold wall. He hadn't slept all night, and his eyes were swollen and bloodshot. His mind wandered aimlessly, filled with late regrets and fear of a dark future. Beside him, Jessica was already awake. The woman moved with extreme care, trying not to make the slightest noise as she put on her shoes. Her eyes were alert, looking alternately at Michael and the mother-in-law, making sure no one noticed her malicious intention to flee that morning. Her right hand occasionally patted her pants pocket, checking that the gold ring with the mother-in-law's ruby was still safely there. It was her ticket to freedom, the capital to start a new life away from the family she now considered useless trash. But before Jessica could even touch the doorknob to escape, a loud crash shook the door of their motel room. Bang! The thin wooden door trembled violently, as if kicked by a giant. Michael jumped, his heart nearly leaping out of his chest. The mother-in-law woke up with a hysterical scream, not understanding what was happening. Jessica shrank back in fear, her face pale. Before they could process the situation, a second kick hit the door harder, breaking the hinges. The door flew open, slamming against the wall, and 3 burly, menacing-looking men entered the small room. Their aura exuded a palpable threat. One of them, a man with a scar on his left cheek and a dragon tattoo peeking out from the collar of his black t-shirt, looked at Michael with a cruel smile that chilled him to the bone. They were loan sharks, the debt collectors from an illegal lending and online gambling syndicate that had been tormenting Michael's life. Michael trembled violently. He had successfully hidden this dark side of his life from Catherine. He had become addicted to online slots a year ago, hoping to multiply his pocket money to maintain Jessica's lavish lifestyle. When he lost, he borrowed money from illegal loan apps and loan sharks with killer interest rates, covering it up with money he secretly siphoned from Catherine's accounts. Now that his access to Catherine's money was cut off, the time bomb had exploded. These debt collectors must have tracked his phone's location, which had been briefly on when Michael called Catherine the night before. The GPS signal had led these predators straight to their dying prey. The tattooed man wasted no time. He stepped forward, grabbed Michael by the shirt collar, and lifted his slender body until his feet barely touched the floor. He shouted harshly at him to pay his debt, which amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars in principal and interest. Michael tried to speak, but his voice was stuck in his throat, and he could only make a squeaking sound, pleading for time and mercy. But mercy was not in these thugs' vocabulary. A powerful punch landed in Michael's stomach, making him double over in pain and fall to the floor, vomiting bile from his empty stomach. The mother-in-law screamed hysterically, seeing her only son being beaten in front of her. She tried to get up to help, but one of the loan shark's henchmen yelled at her to stay still, or she would be next. Amid the chaos, Jessica saw an opportunity. The thug's attention was focused on Michael, who had become their human punching bag. Slowly and stealthily, Jessica crept towards the open door. She thought this was her golden chance. She didn't care if Michael died or was maimed. The important thing was that she survived. But fate had other plans. Just as Jessica was about to slip out, one of the thugs guarding the door noticed her movement. The man quickly grabbed Jessica's long hair and dragged her back into the room. Jessica screamed in pain, struggling to be released. During the struggle, the man grabbed her wrist and felt a hard object inside her pants pocket. Suspecting the woman was hiding something valuable, the man forcibly searched her pocket. Out came the gold ring with the ruby. The man held it up mockingly. "You think you can pay off even the interest on Michael's debt with this?" he asked. The mother-in-law's eyes widened upon seeing her precious ring, the relic of her late husband, which should have been on her ring finger, now in the hands of a thug, taken from Jessica's pocket. The revelation hit the mother-in-law with the force of a lightning bolt. The woman she had praised as the ideal daughter-in-law and defended to the death in front of Catherine was actually a thief. The mother-in-law's fury overcame her fear. She got up from the bed and lunged at Jessica with sharp nails. She didn't care about the thugs surrounding her. Her only goal was to destroy Jessica. In that small room, a tragic and ironic scene unfolded. Michael groaned in pain under the thug's boots, while his mother and mistress fought on the bed. The mother-in-law pulled Jessica's hair, calling her a thief and a whore. Jessica, cornered, did not back down. She scratched the mother-in-law's face, screaming that she was a stupid old woman who deserved to be cheated. The ring flew into a corner of the room, rolling without an owner. The thugs laughed at the drama of a broken family unfolding before their eyes. The tattooed man even recorded the scene with his phone, thinking of using it later as a blackmail tool. They started to rifle through the contents of the bags and suitcases, taking phones, watches, and what little money was left, considering it an initial seizure. The chaos reached its climax when the sirens of a police car were heard approaching and stopping right in front of the motel. The thugs looked at each other, their faces transformed with panic. They knew that getting involved with the police for a serious assault case would be a problem for their boss's business. They quickly spat on Michael one more time, kicked a random suitcase, and fled through the back door of the motel, leaving behind a bruised and shattered Michael, mother-in-law, and Jessica. With the last shred of consciousness, Michael felt a glimmer of hope. He thought a motel neighbor had called the police because of the thug's commotion. He thought the police would save him, take him to the hospital, and protect him. He struggled to his feet, crawling towards the door with a bruised face and bleeding split lips. When two police officers in brown uniforms appeared in the doorway, Michael raised a trembling hand, tried to smile, and said in a low voice, "Help me, officers. They tried to kill me." But the officers didn't smile back. Their faces were cold, firm, and devoid of empathy. One of the officers took out an official document and a pair of silver handcuffs that glinted in the morning sun. The officer read a sentence that turned Michael's last hope to dust. "Michael Johnson, you are under arrest for domestic violence against your wife, Catherine Hayes. This is based on the complaint received, the medical report, and the video evidence that has circulated. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Michael's jaw dropped. His brain couldn't process the information. What had arrived was not rescue, but a cold prison cell. Behind him, the mother-in-law, her face full of scratches from Jessica's nails, looked at the police in terror. Jessica, sitting in a corner of the room clutching clumps of torn-out hair, also turned pale. Another officer entered and said that the mother-in-law and Jessica also had to accompany them to the station to give statements as eyewitnesses, and that if it was proven they had benefited from the proceeds of Michael's crime, they could face charges of complicity or receiving stolen property. That morning ended with Michael being led out of the motel in handcuffs, under the gaze of the other motel guests and curious neighbors who had gathered. Instead of going to the airport for a winter vacation, he limped towards a patrol car that would take him to a cold, suffocating cell. The sky above him was darkly overcast, as if the gates of mercy were closing for a husband who, for a momentary pleasure, had betrayed the sincere heart of his wife, and now that act had become a deadly poison. Time passed slowly, like water dripping in a cave. 3 months had passed since the incident at the airport and the arrest at the sordid motel. Today was Michael's sentencing day. The courtroom in the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse was exceptionally cold. The air conditioning hummed monotonously, spreading a smell of disinfectant and a suffocating tension. Michael sat at the defendant's table. His bright orange prison jumpsuit contrasted sharply with his now dull skin and emaciated body. His hair, once always impeccably styled with expensive gel, was now roughly shorn. His face was gaunt, and the dark circles under his eyes revealed the poor quality of sleep behind bars. He kept his head bowed low, not daring to look towards the public gallery. The courtroom doors opened, and the atmosphere changed in an instant. Catherine entered, accompanied by a team of top lawyers, famous for never having lost a major case. Catherine's appearance was stunning, completely different from the bruised and bloodied woman at the airport 3 months ago. She wore an elegant navy blue suit jacket paired with a softly patterned silk scarf. Her face glowed with health, radiating the aura of a successful woman who had reclaimed her power. There was no trace of sadness in her eyes, only a serenity as vast as the ocean, ready to engulf her opponent. She walked with her back straight and sat gracefully in the victim's witness box, as if the wooden court bench were her queen's throne. The judge banged his gavel, starting the trial. The witnesses were called one by one. Here began the true drama of betrayal, a spectacle of cornered rats biting each other to survive. The first witness to be called was the mother-in-law. The old woman limped to the stand. She looked much older than her age. Her gray hair was no longer dyed, and her clothes were humble. When the prosecutor asked her about the incident of violence at the airport and if she was aware of her son's habitual violent behavior, the mother-in-law did something that broke Michael's heart into 1,000 pieces by shedding crocodile tears. The mother-in-law testified under oath that she was just an old, helpless, and ignorant mother. She claimed that Michael had forced her all this time to hate Catherine. "I was afraid of my son, Your Honor," the mother-in-law sobbed with a trembling voice, dramatized to the fullest. "Michael has a terrible temper. If I didn't follow his wishes to hate Catherine, he would yell at me. I actually loved Catherine, but I was being coerced by Michael. He forced me to go to the airport and insult Catherine. I am a victim of an ungrateful son, Your Honor." Michael stared at his mother with wide eyes. He wanted to scream and deny all those lies. He wanted to remind his mother that she was the one who always whispered in his ear that Catherine was cheap, that a wife should obey, that Catherine's money was his right. But his lawyer pressed his shoulder, signaling him to keep quiet. Michael felt a pain sharper than the punches from the thugs. His own mother, the person he had defended even by hitting his wife, was now discarding him like trash to avoid justice as an accomplice to psychological violence. Instead of defending the son who had sacrificed everything for her, the mother-in-law chose to save her own wrinkled skin. The next witness was Jessica, the ex-co-worker and mistress who had been the source of it all. Jessica entered with her head bowed, dressed in modest and simple clothes, trying to create an image of an innocent and lost woman. Jessica's testimony was equally devastating. Before the judge, Jessica stated that at first, she didn't know Michael was a married man. A lie so big it made Catherine crack a cynical smile from her seat. She said Michael had introduced himself as a wealthy divorcee looking for a life partner. "I was deceived, Your Honor," Jessica said in a low voice. "Michael promised me a life of luxury and trips abroad. I didn't know the money was the result of exploiting his wife. If I had known, I would never have wanted him. I am also a victim of this man's lies." Jessica placed all the blame on Michael. She denied having participated in escalating the situation at the airport. She denied having insulted Catherine. She painted herself as a naive girl who had fallen for Michael's manipulation. Michael glared at Jessica, the woman who used to flirt with him, the one who would say, "I'll love you forever, baby," when he bought her a designer handbag. Now she was stabbing a dagger straight into his heart in front of a court. There was no love or loyalty. It was all fake, as plastic as a credit card with no funds at the airport. Michael realized how stupid he had been to trade Catherine, a real diamond, for Jessica, a pebble that was now stoning him to death. When it was Catherine's turn to give her additional testimony, the atmosphere instantly became silent. Catherine did not scream, did not cry, did not curse. She simply presented a thick folder of documents to the judge. It wasn't just evidence of domestic violence, it was new evidence of something much more serious: embezzlement of company assets. It turned out that while in Canada, she had ordered a team of independent auditors to investigate the finances of the real estate company inherited from her father, where Michael held the position of operations manager. The audit results were appalling. It was discovered that Michael had embezzled millions of dollars from the company's funds over the past 2 years, falsifying supplier information and inflating renovation costs. The money was used to fund Michael's online gambling addiction and the lifestyle of Jessica and his mother, Mr. Davies, the company's CEO and Catherine's uncle, also testified as a prosecution witness in this embezzlement case. "This is no longer a domestic matter," Catherine said, looking the judge in the eye calmly but sharply. "This is a pure crime. The defendant has not only caused me physical harm but has stolen the rights of my employees, manipulated my family's trust, and destroyed the company's integrity. I am not seeking revenge, but the most equitable justice so that there are no more victims." Michael slumped in his chair, powerless. A cold sweat ran down his back. He knew his life was over. The domestic violence case alone could put him in prison for years. With the large-scale embezzlement case added, he would probably rot in a cell for the rest of his youth. He looked around the room. His mother averted her gaze, pretending to rummage through her purse. Jessica stared at the floor, avoiding his gaze. And Catherine looked directly at him. It was no longer a look of love or hate. It was the look one gives to a pathetic, pitiable stranger. The judge banged his gavel, declaring a recess to deliberate the verdict, but the aura of defeat had already completely enveloped Michael. As the officers led him back to the temporary holding cell, Michael crossed paths with Catherine in the hallway. Michael wanted to open his mouth, wanted to apologize, wanted to beg, but his tongue was stuck to the roof of his mouth. Catherine stopped for a moment, just a few feet from him. The scent of her perfume floated gently, the scent of success he could no longer reach. "You know, Michael," she whispered in a low voice, and her voice was like the winter wind that chills to the bone, "I might have died for you before. But now, seeing how your mother and your mistress betray you, I've realized something. Your heaviest punishment isn't prison. Your heaviest punishment is living with the knowledge that you abandoned the only person who truly loved you for people who won't even deign to look at you when you're in trouble. Enjoy your solitude." Catherine walked away. The sound of her heels, click-clack, faded into the distance, leaving Michael like a stone statue, tears finally gushing forth, tears of remorse that no longer had any value. The iron door of the holding cell slammed shut behind him with a thunderous sound, locking Michael in the darkness of a destiny he had designed himself. The main courtroom of the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse fell silent again, but this time the silence felt much heavier and more oppressive, as if all the oxygen in the room had been sucked out by the climactic tension. The presiding judge, a middle-aged man with thick glasses and an air of unassailable authority, adjusted his black robe before reading the sentence. Michael sat at the defendant's table, slumping further and further. Cold sweat soaked his back, seeping through the orange prison jumpsuit. Behind him, the public gallery was filled with journalists and onlookers curious about the end of the airport husband drama. Catherine sat silently in the front row with her lawyer, staring fixedly at the judge, expressionless, as if she were witnessing the reading of a boring business report rather than the fate of her ex-husband. The judge's voice broke the silence, reading the verdict in a flat but firm tone that resonated throughout the room. Based on the irrefutable evidence, including the medical report of Mrs. Catherine Hayes's injuries, the viral video recording, witness testimonies, and the evidence from the forensic audit of the company's finances, the court finds that the defendant, Michael Johnson, has been proven clearly and convincingly to have committed continued acts of domestic violence, both physical and psychological, and the crime of felony embezzlement. Therefore, the court sentences the defendant to a term of 12 years in prison and orders him to pay a fine and restitution for damages of $5 million to the company. If not paid, the defendant's personal assets will be seized by the state and the prison sentence will be extended. The gavel struck 3 times. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was like a death knell for Michael's future. His legs gave way. He nearly slid off his chair if not for the prison guard beside him. 12 years. His youth would vanish behind bars. He would come out an old man, with nothing. No assets, no career, no family. The sentence also included the confiscation of all remaining assets in Michael's name. His car, which he hadn't even finished paying for, his sports motorcycle, and even his personal account balance, which was already empty, were seized to cover a tiny fraction of the money he had stolen from the company. Michael was officially and legally bankrupt. He turned, searching for his mother's or Jessica's face, hoping for a glimmer of compassion, but the witness bench was empty. They had fled before the sentence was read, fearing further involvement. Outside the courthouse, Jessica's fate was no better. The woman tried to slip out a side door to avoid reporters, but her face, which had become too famous on social media, was easily recognizable. A group of women, outraged by the video of her at the airport, yelled at Jessica and threw empty water bottles and food scraps at her. Jessica ran terrified towards the main street, crying with humiliation and fear. But Jessica's suffering was just beginning. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing, not with comforting friends, but with unknown numbers threatening her. Because Michael and Jessica had often shared their personal information, the illegal online loan collectors who had his social security number began to pursue her. Jessica tried to go back to her luxury apartment, but in front of the door, her belongings had been put out by the landlord in large black trash bags. The landlord, a firm woman who didn't want her place contaminated, evicted her on the spot after some unknown thugs looking for Jessica caused a disturbance. Jessica also received a termination email from her job for damaging the institution's reputation. Jobless, homeless, and pursued by debts, the once arrogant and flirtatious Jessica now wandered the streets of Manhattan. She tried to contact her friends, but all her numbers had been blocked. No one wanted to take in the viral Mistress who could bring trouble. In the end, Jessica was seen crying at a street food stall, lamenting her fate with the last $50 in her hand, realizing that her beauty couldn't save her from the ruin she had sown herself. Meanwhile, the mother-in-law's karma came in a quiet but painful way. After giving false testimony against her own son in court, the mother-in-law was kicked out by a distant relative she was temporarily staying with. They were ashamed to have a relative who had gone viral as a wicked mother-in-law and a traitor to her own son. "I don't want journalists or debt collectors coming to our house because of you," her cousin said, shutting the door in her face. Wandering aimlessly with a heavy suitcase of clothes, the mother-in-law made a desperate attempt. She took a cab to Catherine's parents' house, hoping her former in-laws would still have the conscience to take in an old woman like her. Arriving at the gate of Catherine's parents' imposing house, the mother-in-law was stopped by security guards. She begged on her knees on the hot asphalt to be allowed to see Catherine's mother. "Please, tell her I want to apologize. I was out of my mind. I have nowhere to go. I'm her son's mother." But the security guard relayed the cold message from the homeowners. "Sorry, ma'am. The lady of the house said she doesn't know you." She also said that government-run social welfare institutions are more suitable for housing people without family. The mother-in-law collapsed. Her pride, which once soared to the sky, was now on the ground. Eventually, a social services patrol that was on rounds picked her up for being considered a homeless person disturbing public order. She was taken to a social welfare institution on the outskirts of the city. There, the mother-in-law had to sleep on a thin mattress alongside dozens of other homeless people, eat from a lunch tray with meager side dishes, and spend her old age in endless regret without a single child or daughter-in-law to visit her. A week after the sentencing, Catherine decided to visit Michael one last time before he was transferred to a higher security prison. In the visitation room, separated by thick glass and iron bars, Michael was led in by a guard. His appearance was deplorable. His head was completely shaved, his face dull with acne marks and scars that hadn't yet healed. His body looked gaunt, as if only bones were left. The arrogant aura he had always radiated was completely gone, replaced by an aura of dark despair. Seeing Catherine, so radiant, clean, and perfumed, sitting on the other side of the table, Michael broke down in tears. His crying was explosive, the cry of a loser who realizes his stupidity in throwing away a diamond and clinging to trash. Michael tried to reach for Catherine's hand through the bars, but Catherine calmly withdrew it. "Catherine, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was an idiot. Please, help me. I can't stand it in here. The food is rotten. I get beaten by other inmates every night. Talk to your lawyer to get my sentence reduced. When I get out, I'll dedicate my life to you. I promise." Michael babbled in a hoarse voice as tears and snot mixed on his dirty face. Catherine looked at Michael with an indecipherable gaze. It wasn't hatred or anger. It was a look of pity, like one gives to a sick dog dying on the street. Catherine placed a brown envelope on the table. "I didn't come to hear your worthless promises, Michael," Catherine said in a soft but firm voice. "I came to deliver a copy of our divorce papers. The family court accepted my petition yesterday. We are now legally divorced. There is no longer any relationship between us." Michael shook his head hysterically, refusing to touch the envelope. "No, Catherine, don't leave me. Who will take care of me? I don't know anything about my mother. Jessica has disappeared. You're all I have left." Catherine smiled slightly, a smile that hinted at the relief of having a huge weight lifted from her. "That's the point, Michael. You are alone now because of your own choices. You abandoned a sincere wife, exploited a greedy mother, and cheated with a materialistic woman. Now enjoy the harvest of what you have sown." Catherine stood up and adjusted her jacket. She looked Michael in the eyes one last time, deeply. "Thank you, Michael. Your slap at the airport that day was the best thing you ever did for me. That pain woke me up from a long dream. If it weren't for that slap, I would probably still be living as a foolish wife, feeding a parasite like you. Now, I am free." Catherine turned and walked towards the exit without looking back again, even as Michael screamed her name until he was hoarse and was forcibly dragged by the guards back to his dark cell. Catherine stepped out of the prison building and took a deep breath of the free air. The normally gray New York sky seemed unusually blue and clear that day. Justice had been served. Karma had collected its price, and the old book had been firmly closed. There were no more grudges weighing on her heart, only a vast relief, as wide as the future that now stretched before her. 6 months had passed since the storm of her life had raged and passed. Like a promise from the universe, time acted as the most powerful healer for those who strive to rise again. Catherine's life had changed drastically, far better than she had ever imagined. Her real estate and catering businesses thrived. With the financial drain Michael had eliminated, the company's profits soared. Catherine used the profits to expand her business and establish a charitable foundation for victims of domestic violence, a sincere dedication born from her bitter experience to help other women speak up bravely. Catherine's name was no longer that of the viral victim wife, but that of an inspiring, strong, and compassionate entrepreneur. Her face often graced business magazines, radiating a balanced beauty and strength. This morning, the atmosphere at Catherine's parents' house was warm and lively. Large suitcases were neatly lined up in the living room, but this time there was no drama, no tension, no parasites. Catherine was helping her mother tuck a knitted shawl into her handbag. Her father, a wise retired gentleman, hummed a little tune as he checked their passports and plane tickets. Today, they were going on a 3-week spring vacation to Europe. This was the trip Catherine had long dreamed of, taking her parents to travel the world with the money she had earned through her hard work, making them happy in their old age, something that had previously been postponed due to being busy with Michael and his family's problems. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Catherine's father asked, patting her shoulder affectionately with a wide smile. "Yes, Dad. The car to the airport is already waiting outside," Catherine replied, taking her father's arm. She felt a deep peace, feeling the warmth of a real family. There was no more complaining mother-in-law asking for shopping sprees, no Michael who only looked at his phone. Just her mother's cheerful laughter as she joked with her father about the arthritis medication he shouldn't forget. The trip to JFK Airport felt very different this time. As their luxury car entered the Terminal 4 area, a memory from 6 months ago crossed Catherine's mind. She glanced towards the meeting point at gate B-22, where she was once slapped and humiliated. But strangely, there was no more pain. The wound had completely healed, leaving only the scar of a valuable lesson. Catherine smiled faintly at that memory, as if greeting a ghost from the past that no longer had the power to hurt her. She held her parents' hands and walked with a firm, confident stride towards the first-class check-in counter. This time, there was no drama of declined cards or canceled tickets. The staff greeted them with utmost kindness, offering the best service to Catherine and her family. A few hours later, Catherine was comfortably seated in a first-class seat of a 5-star airline bound for Zurich. The luxurious interior of the cabin, the seat that converted into a flatbed, and the fresh orange juice on the side table made the atmosphere very private and serene. Her father and mother were sitting across the aisle, enthusiastically pressing the buttons for the advanced features of their seats like little children. Catherine looked at them with eyes full of happy tears. This was true happiness, sharing wealth with the people who truly love us, unconditionally. As the plane began to taxi towards the runway, Catherine, out of boredom, turned on the television screen in front of her to look for something to watch. She switched to a national news channel. Suddenly, a breaking news story caught her attention. The news headline was written in large letters on the screen: "High-profile prisoners transferred to maximum security prison." Catherine was about to change the channel, but she recognized a familiar figure on the screen. The news camera focused on a line of prisoners with their hands and feet shackled, boarding a ferry bound for an infamous prison island. Among the line of rough-looking inmates was the figure of a gaunt man with a shaved head and sunken face. It was Michael. He looked extremely old and frail, limping as he walked due to the weight of the chains. His face was dirty, and his eyes stared blankly at the ground, as if the soul inside that body was already dead. Beside him, another inmate gave him a rough shove on the shoulder, and Michael could only accept it submissively, not daring to resist. The news narrator mentioned that Michael had been transferred after being involved in a fight over debts in his previous prison and would now spend the remaining 12 years of his sentence in a maximum security isolation cell. In another corner of the screen, a news clip about raids on the homeless was briefly shown, where a glimpse of the mother-in-law's face could be seen, sitting expressionlessly on the terrace of a social welfare center, while Jessica's face appeared on a wanted poster for a case of illegal loan fraud. Their worlds had truly collapsed, shattered at the bottom of the abyss they had dug for themselves. Catherine stared at the screen for a few seconds. There was no malicious smile of victory, no excessive satisfaction, no more tears, just a neutral feeling, an acceptance that the law of sowing what you reap was real and absolute. Michael, the mother-in-law, and Jessica were now just fragments of criminal news on television, strangers who no longer had any relevance in her life. With a slow, elegant movement, Catherine pressed the power button on the remote control. The television screen went black, forever shutting out those faces from the past. Catherine then turned her head towards the airplane window. Outside, the plane's engines roared powerfully, lifting the giant iron bird off the hot tarmac of New York, piercing through the white clouds towards an infinite blue sky. "Catherine, what are you going to eat later?" her mother asked from across the aisle, pulling her from her thoughts. Catherine turned and smiled widely, the most genuine smile she had ever had. "Anything, Mom. Everything will be delicious if I eat it with you." Catherine leaned back, pulled the soft blanket up to her chest, and closed her eyes. The cold, painful winter of her life was over. The storm had passed, leaving behind fertile land where new flowers would bloom. Now, at 30,000 feet, Catherine welcomed the eternal spring that had arrived in her life, realizing that happiness is not something you beg from others, but something you create for yourself. With courage, pride, and firmness, The plane continued to soar through the skies, carrying her to new adventures, leaving hell behind and heading towards the paradise she had built with her own hands.